Exactly. And they've been teachers. Yeah, exactly. So she can help. I would. Ready to go?
Good idea. I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Village Planning Commission of Elmont for September 4th, 2025 to order, please. May I have a roll call?
Tedeschi,
Here.
Meek,
Here.
Zender, Dyke, Miller,
Present.
Keller,
Here.
Schneider.
All
Present.
present and accounted for. All right, good deal. Next item is the approval of the agenda. Unless there are any changes or alterations or corrections, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as it's presented.
So move. Whoops.
Okay, I have a move by Steve and a support by Tim. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. The next item is the approval of the minutes for the regular meeting of May 1st, 2025. They are in your packet if you've had a chance to take a look at them. Unless there are any changes or alterations or corrections, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I've edited those minutes and I make a motion to approve. They look spot on to me.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Communications. Kim, do you have anything for us? Nothing tonight? Thank you very much. Public comments. Do any of you students have anything to say today?
Oh, thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Are you all from the same class? No.
Well, yeah, same class.
Yeah.
Different periods.
Well, welcome anyway. It's
You
nice
on the
to-
night shift? Is that why
Yeah,
you said good
yeah.
morning?
Yeah. They went to McDonald's.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's nice to have you all here. Public hearings, we have none tonight. New business, we have none tonight. The next item is unfinished business. In your board packet, we received a communication relating to an issue that we had back in April regarding change in use, policy, and review. And Caitlin, would you like to take a few minutes and walk us through some of that communication and point out some things that we need to consider? It was quite self-explanatory. Tim, do you have any comments in relation to it, since it was addressed to you?
Just that I think it's appropriate that we send it back to the zoning approval, the zoning administrator.
Okay.
And I think the information speaks for itself.
Do many of the members, having read it, do you have any questions or anything, or is it pretty well self-explanatory?
I'd like to comment upon it. The presentation was done by Steve Schneider, but not me. That's by Councilmember Steve Schneider. My son, I think he's related. And I know he put in about 10 hours doing all of this. Whether it's legal or council, that's what he does. And since I certainly had something to do with the motions that we made at our last meeting, Caitlin and I don't always agree on things, but I would not dispute for a moment that she knows what she's talking about. And she was trying to point us in the right direction as far as what we were doing. My motivation in making the motion that I did at our last meeting is that I wanted to maintain authority with the Planning Commission and not pass it off administratively so that we didn't play a role. And that's fine, except that doesn't follow my own rule when I used to be president, which is that whatever you're doing, putting in place, has to actually work as a practical matter. And we do so many of these transactions, sales and purchases of buildings, land, and businesses. And by having change of use requiring coming to planning commission each and every time, doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that it delays things considerably. And in so many of these transactions, that delay often, or with enough frequency to be concerned, result in the deal falling through. Purchasers come along and say, I need to start within the next 30 days, whatever it might be. And I can't wait 2, 3 months, 4 months, whatever it might be. And so if it doesn't work, we shouldn't do it. And Stephen also raises potential legal issues, and that can be argued either way, but he makes a decent argument that it actually is not legal in violation of the zoning act, the Michigan state's law, and also makes the argument that it's a violation of our village charter. So for those reasons, like, is it even viable to do that? And makes many more arguments in favor of we shouldn't have done that. And so bottom line for me, in terms of approving his presentation as to what we should be doing, is that it, as a practical matter, it just doesn't work out. So why should we be doing that? And he has certain recommended actions, and I'm inclined to make a motion to follow the recommended actions as set forth. Caitlin, did you have any issues with regard to the recommended actions?
No, and I think one of the biggest things, if we wanted to elaborate on it too, is do we want to clarify not just when we have everything that's permitted, but do we want to fix that classification and what does that mean? That is very unique to our village interpretation. And so that could be something we could fix, because usually communities, you have a change in tenants. Whenever somebody occupying the space changes, that's a trigger for check-in. There's a change in use. So if it goes from a restaurant to a barber shop, that's changing the use. And so those are more common terminologies used in the industry. And so if we wanted to go a step further and clarify, not only when is it permitted, making it administrative, but what are those, I guess, what is the actual trigger for those? And those are the most two common options for jurisdictions.
I would really like to see us do that. I mean, I think that's part of the reason we ran into the problem at the last meeting, is we didn't have clear standards and what triggers the action and refining it. And you could help us do that, I presume. So we would need to take planning commission action requesting you to do it. But I think that's the problem. It was all too vague and too open. And I think as came out of the last meeting, well, sometimes it was the village manager and sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes zoning administrator, sometimes it wasn't. And it depended who the manager was or what mood he might have been in, whatever, which is not a proper foundation to proceed under. So I would like to see the standards, the criteria further refined. I think that would be wise. And so, I mean, this whole circumstance that presented to us, even though I didn't like tattoos, I think really was an important wisening experience. I think a lot wiser for what we're actually doing here. So, in a certain fashion, this was a good thing to happen here, I think. 'Cause we learn a lot from it. Where to go from here?
You could tell at the meeting that we did this discussion, we were not clear as to what we could and couldn't do. And so we took the most conservative and just said, we're going to do this. And that brought this to a head, which is what we have now in front of us. And by designing this with Caitlin's help, if we need to fine tune some of this, then we'll have a standard to go by from this point forward. I would tend to agree. Tim, practically and economically, in the write-up that he sent you, have we heard anything since April as far as businesses?
I don't think so, because we've discussed it, the importance of doing it, but on the council side, we had 3 or 4 major initiative and issues going on that needed to be addressed. So we discussed this, the timing of this, if it could be prolonged to this point. So I don't think there's been a major effect, but I don't think we should continue down the road without making the change.
I was wondering, that was one of the questions I had as to whether or not that, Caitlin, one of the recommendations that we have, you have those in front of you?
Yes, I do. That's what I was
Okay.
pulling up. I was like,
The one I was asking, one of the ones, the delegation applies to all permitted by right uses. What does that mean?
So when you look at our table of uses, the intent is to be a very easy way to say, if it's a permitted use, which means it should be customary, it should be harmonious with surrounding businesses. So we think of the downtown restaurants generally are permitted. We think of retail as permitted, a bakery, a coffee shop, those all make sense. As opposed to special land uses, which you have a public notice for. Everyone within 300 feet gets notified. There's a notice to put in the paper, in which there could be some level of nuisance associated with it. So that's why you have a permitted category and a special land use category. You're expecting more nuisances with the special land use.
I see.
And that's why you're giving them special permission to do that there. And that's when it's most common that we put in conditions. We say, we want you to have hours of operation till 12 o'clock, not 3 in the morning or 24-hour Taco Bell or whatever the case is for drive-throughs. So that's why you'd have the 2 different ones. So I believe what he's intending is when it's permitted by right, it's supposed to be customary. That would be an administrative review process. And so when I mentioned earlier, the 2 different triggers is a change in use or a change in tenant. That's where we will want to fine tune that trigger, because just because the operator changes, so if it goes from a Dollar General to a Family Dollar or Dollar Store downtown,
Right.
do we want there to be that check-in? So it's not a change in use, it's a change in tenant. For some jurisdictions, that's the answer is yes. So City of Lapeer, any change in tenant, they want to check in.
I see.
Part of their being is they have a business registration program. So they have an updated emergency contact, things of that nature. They commonly find that is a way to amend an issue between building improvements, because at least the building department knew there's now a different tenant there. And we at least start the conversation to say, so if you're changing it from this nail salon to this nail salon and you want to add a new tub sink or somewhere, whatever, and you choose to move the plumbing, that's a permit. That's not something you just do, and things of that nature. So it helps us have that early on conversation. Same thing with signage. So whenever there's an occupant change, you're clearly going to have a signage change. So we kind of can watch that process.
If somebody wanted to modernize the building and change it entirely, would that be something that would come here, or would that be handled by the zoning administrator?
You're talking about exterior changes?
Exterior, interior. Let's say they want to modernize the entire building for their specific purpose, for their business. Is that something we would still have an opportunity to look at, or would that be something that would be reviewed by the zoning administrator?
So the internal building would never come to the planning commission. We do not review building
You
plans.
go through the permitting process. it would go through the permitting process.
Correct,
And
so,
interior.
Permitting.
Changes to the outside or specifically to the land, like in the case of the old Salary, when they wanted to change the structure of the parking lot and the facade and all that sort of stuff. That changes the change of the building on the outside, that would come to us, correct?
correct. Exterior changes would involve us, because that's where we have our building appearance requirements.
Now, in the discussion we had with the tattoo shop, one of the recommendations you made to us, or we had to discuss, was the parking issue. How do we deal with that inside the village limits, or, within the downtown area? Because we only have limited parking, and let's suppose we were fortunate enough to get a business that draws a substantial crowd. How do we handle that, and what do we do?
So right now, what you have is that if it's zoned downtown, or C or B1, C1, sorry, got to check what community I'm in. We actually waive parking requirements, as opposed to if you do otherwise business, then you have to meet on-site requirements. And so so in the city of Lapeer, for example, they have the same kind of business. You got so many tenants, but then you have only so much parking lot. And so what they did was they started calculating how many people were actually using that parking or part of that parking. So sometimes they have a second downtown where you require half of the parking on site. And so I would still tabulate what that number was, and then we could watch that number and say, when are we hitting a problem in which this strategy doesn't work? And so it was more of a reactionary approach as opposed to proactive. It was generally never the stance that we would say no to somebody just because of parking in the downtown. But again, Lapeer is a different jurisdiction. They have a bit more parking than we do from that standpoint. So at least administratively, if this was to be fully administrative, that is always something that we would check. And that would be something that we could say, or look at the rules and regulations, and maybe it says, if your one establishment has over 20 parking spaces, maybe that's when it leaves the administrative round. Or is that when we say it's not appropriate there?
Okay. All right. I had some other questions. I can't remember what they were right now. Does anybody else have any other questions?
So if you have a business,
Yes, go ahead.
all right, and you sell that business to someone else, what has to be done? They're doing the same thing.
So if it's the same tenant and the operator so if it's the same tenant, so let's say it's an escape room, and the escape room, the business owner says, I'm going to sell it to Billy instead of Bob, or whatever, it changes ownership. That's not an issue. So the tenant is still the same, and the use is still the same. And so in either scenario, you wouldn't change anything. Now, once you change tenant, I would say most jurisdictions at least have a zoning permit be required, in which you just check the use and you check the parking, and different things of that nature. But it's a pretty straightforward procedure. So for the city of Lapeer, what they do is you have your zoning permit, you have your business registration, you have then any potential building signage permits and things of that nature. And those are the three. And then Emily City has established a process where they require an emergency contact and a zoning permit. Those are the only two that they require.
Example, let's say Roots. Okay.
Bruce, you said?
Roots.
Roots, the restaurant.
Oh, Roots the restaurant.
Yeah,
Okay.
the restaurant. He sells to someone else. What has to be done?
Is it still Roots?
Yeah, so gonna be Roots.
Nothing.
Nothing? Okay.
Nothing.
So
So it doesn't matter, even though it changed.
Changed ownership.
It's just an ownership, it's a private ownership change.
Okay.
Right, but if it changed from Roots to the Cauldron and it was still a restaurant, that would be a change in tenant, and you would have to get that zoning permit to verify.
now, the way the recommendations are laid out, if there's a change of major category business, like the one we had with the tattoo, we determined was in the same category. But if you change category, that then comes here. If a new business coming in is in an entirely different category than the one that was leaving, what happens then?
So I would just dismiss anything with category, in my opinion,
Okay.
because at the end of the day, it's a permitted use or it's a special land use. So I think the special land uses come to the planning commission automatically, and there's some nuisance for it. As opposed to category in that table of uses, when you have a commercial or industrial or residential, we already made the choice. Is it harmonious or is it not harmonious? And so that's where I don't think the categories is very useful, because if somebody decides to take an office space and turn it into residential, does that need to come here? And I'd say generally if the apartment is on the second floor and that's what they choose to invest in, that's a permitted use. That's something that wouldn't require our oversight. But if they wanted to change the second story to more of a manufacturing type thing, I think that's a special land use in our downtown, then of course that would come to us. And so I think we already have established when it's significant by that special land use or that permitted. And it just takes out the category, which is very unique.
Okay. Now, it does say one here, one of the recommendations is a clear written standards and criteria for review shall be developed. What would you recommend we do, or have you even thought about it?
So most zoning permits applications, they have you fill them out, and then there's an administration checklist, and that's very standardized. So you check, is it a permitted use? Great. Then you check if there's any use requirements with that. You check the parking, and then you might mention any notes associated with it. So that's very standard practice, and we would double check kind of the genericness of it, but.
Does anybody else have any questions? Let me ask you this then, are we comfortable with these recommendations as they were written? Does anybody have any concerns or questions? They seem to meet the needs that we're looking for. Then I'd entertain a motion based on the recommended.
I'll make the motion, but before I make the motion, just to contextualize for the students, because they're probably sitting there wondering what the crap we're talking about.
Go ahead.
So so a change of use is when a business such as the tattoo parlor shop that just came in that kind of triggered all this was previously a different type of business. It was an office or something else. So it was brought to us that when a business changes its type, say Roots is a restaurant now, and then it becomes a boutique shop or a barber shop. Previously, that was all handled under administration from the zoning administrator, who happens to be the village manager. It was brought to us that it would probably be better for this board to handle this. So we made the change for this board to handle it. And then after further research and the impact study, we decided that's not the smart thing to do. So we're changing it back to the zoning administrator, who's the village manager. So basically, we're going back the way it was. But so anytime a business in the downtown area or within the village limits changes its use from one type of business to another, it would be handled internally by the zoning administrator and not by this board, if that makes sense. So that's what we're discussing, because you guys were probably wondering what the crap are we talking about. So I thought it would be better to educate you a little bit. So
Thank you. That's a very good explanation.
you're very welcome. And with that said, I think it's important that the motion is read into the record.
Okay.
So I will try and concisely, but
I'll support the
I
motion.
will concisely but quickly try to read it.
So anyway, first, Tim, I have the motion and I have a second over here.
Right. So I'm gonna read the motion into the record.
That would be fine.
Tim,
Yes.
one second,
Yep.
if you don't mind. Do you think, Caitlin, that it should be two separate motions? Sub A, B, C, and D which is the recommended actions, and a separate motion with regard to developing the improvements that you recommended.
I don't think the improvements need to be in a motion. I think the improvements are just the recommendation of the board.
Because some of these are not powers by the planning commission, so fees, those are established by village council. So that wouldn't be appropriate for this venue to really, you could recommend it to the council through our liaisons, but that wouldn't be necessarily permissible. With B, as far as the zoning administrator providing written notice to delegates of that approval, that's going beyond what's required. You can do that. So some communities say every change in use, there is a notice. So the Village of Holly does that in Oakland County. Everything is noticed. That's a very large expense for if people care about different things. As far as the standards associated with those criteria, that can either be in the zoning ordinance, but it already kind of is. So it's more administrative in updating the form and application. So you can direct the administration to generally recommend to do that, but ultimately that's the city or the village manager's more or less responsibility there. And as far as E, talking about the planning commission retaining the authority for the specific category changes, as I mentioned, I don't know that we'd want to keep the category classification change because that's why we have permitted and special land use. So you could super simplify the proposed motion to be that you're going to initiate a text amendment to address administrative changes of uses. Because that's ultimately what this board is in charge of doing, is in charge of doing text amendments to the zoning ordinance, which may ripple and make other changes necessary based on what we write, as far as what those standard checklist items are, or if you want to have notices more frequently in what procedure.
So what would, of these here, which ones would we change?
So I pretty much would change all of them.
We change them all.
What is your recommended motion?
Do you have one? I mean, we'd be more than happy to entertain your motion.
Yeah, as somebody that doesn't write motions. So I would recommend that your action you would deliberate on is to make a motion to initiate a text amendment to address changes of uses in the zoning ordinance administratively.
That makes sense?
I'm lost.
Okay, try again.
Let me think.
I mean, if you did 10 hours of research and these are recommended.
So I think these can all be done, but they don't have to be a formalized motion at this planning commission, because some of these recommendations.
Should they be suggested actions within the motion?
So then I would go to maybe this is a two-step motion. So the first motion you do have authority over is to initiate a text amendment to the zoning ordinance regarding the changes of use administrative review.
Okay, stop. Did you get that one, Kim? Okay, now keep going.
Okay.
That's one. All right, go ahead.
And then step 2 is to recommend to the village council to consider review of the fee schedule with administrative approvals, to review and revise forms and applications regarding standards for those administrative approvals. Yeah.
That's 2. Did you get that, Kim?
I haven't gotten any of it.
So then that would be the 2 motions, not this as it's written.
Correct.
Okay. Kim, you want to read that for Tim before we go any farther?
Okay. The first motion to initiate a text amendment to address the change in use in zoning ordinance
Hold on, before we.
administration.
Hold on, before we do that, the first one motion has to be to put the authority back to the village administrator for handling change of use, correct?
We can. Yep, that's true.
But that's the main point we're here.
Yes.
So we've made 2 motions, but the 2 motions have not included anything that, in regards to making that provision, because that's the main provision we're changing. So one motion should be to delegate the authority in review and change of use application to the zoning administrator from the planning commission,
Period.
correct?
Other than your current zoning ordinance still has it written that some of that should go back to the planning commission. So that's why the text amendment is important to clean that up. As opposed to, it was an interpretation clarification is really what we did. And saying that we would like to review every change in use and category. It was a interpretation clarification. And so yes, in the short term, it would make sense to make that motion to say that we'd like to reinterpret to clarify that the planning commission does not review every change in use. And that is an administrative function.
One of the problems that we're dealing with here is the presentation of why we should change what we did at the last meeting was done from a lawyer-like perspective, but Stephen's not a planner, and Caitlin is, and I think that's part of what bumping heads on this. Is she? Because, I mean, she not only has, all the refined perspectives on all the aspects of zoning and our ordinances, but also what other communities are
So
doing.
we have 5 bullet point. Okay, so right now we've got the motion that we need to delegate the authority back to the zoning administrator from the planning commission for application for change of use applications, correct? That's the main point, number 1. So point A, the delegation applies to permitted by right uses that do not involve substantial physical changes to site. How do we implement that into the motion, or does that need to be implemented into the motion?
So I think motion number 1 that was suggested addresses that.
Okay. So the motion I just stated addresses that.
Yes.
Okay. B, the zoning administrator shall provide written notice to adjoining property owners for all delegated approvals. Does that need to be part of the motion, or is that?
So that needs to be a text amendment. I really, because that's a shift policy wise.
So what is a text amendment?
So a text amendment is a process of modifying the ordinance. And so we did that for the food trucks. We did that for the.
So how is that, so how would we implement that change?
So we would do a motion that would initiate a text amendment. And so then at the next meeting, we could meet and I would show you a write-up of what that would reflect.
Okay, so bullet point A would be in motion 1, which is making the change from planning commission to the zoning administrator.
Correct.
Yep.
B is a text amendment that we can make a motion on.
Yes.
C, this fee schedule, is that in a motion, or is that just a recommendation to council to change the fee schedule?
Recommendation to council.
But does that need to be part of a motion?
No.
Okay.
D doesn't need to be in a motion either, does it?
So some communities like to put that in the text amendment, so it's very formalized.
Okay.
I would argue that it's already in there.
There,
It's just a
yeah.
matter of making it easier to understand in a
Okay,
form.
So B and D are text amendments, correct?
Correct.
And can that be from the same motion? I make a text amendment to make these changes. And I'm sorry, students, but we grouped this up last time, so I want to make sure that we're getting this correct.
That's fine, Tim, thank you.
E, we retain the authority to reclaim, review specific categories of changes that have a significant community impact. Is that text amendment? Is that something we already do because those come to us already?
Correct. So how the current language is written, that's how we would interpret it, is that a change in class has to come to the planning commission. I think a text amendment to remove the classification would be easier for everyone moving forward.
What classification?
Using that term, rather, we should use the term change in use or a change in tenant. Those are more common industry triggers.
As opposed to what this says, which are the categories.
Correct.
I see. So you're saying if it's a special land use, it's
Change in
coming.
use and tenant, not a classification.
Say that again?
Text amendment for Part E would be we're changing the language to specify that it's a change in use or tenant and not a change in class.
Correct. But the motion for the text amendment doesn't have to be that specific.
Okay, so the motion for the text amendment should say what, so we can cover B, D, and E.
To initiate a text amendment to address the change in use in the zoning ordinance administratively, is that?
So you could say that you initiate a text amendment to address the change in use applications of the zoning ordinance, and you could reference this letter. You could say based on the letter dated, when was this dated? August 26th, addressing subsection recommendation actions, as you mentioned, B, D, and E. That would provide very clear direction.
What are we, David? Okay, let's try this and see how it goes. I make the motion, number one, to formally delegate the authority to review change of use applications to the zoning administrator.
Tim, before you finish that, could I, building administrator, for all permitted by right uses that do not involve substantial physical changes to the site. Does that make sense? How does that sound?
Okay, I make the motion that we formally delegate authority to review change in use of applications to the zoning administrator,
For all permitted by right uses that do not involve.
substantial physical changes to the site.
Bingo. Does that make sense, Caitlin? Do we all understand what it means? Do I have a second?
Support.
I have a support. Any other discussion? Steve?
Steve.
Or Bob? I'm sorry. Was it Bob?
Okay, it was Bob.
Is there any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Now, the next one.
I make a motion to make a text amendment change in use to address changes in use application based on the recommendations of the letter sent to Planning Commission dated August 26, 2025, page 5 under recommended actions, bullet points B, D, and E to address changes in the application based on the recommendation.
Sound okay?
I think the only word you missed was initiate a text amendment.
Initiated text amendment.
Yeah, that was the
Okay.
only one.
Kim, do you have that?
I believe so. Thankfully, it's being recorded, so.
Yeah. You know who's gonna look at the next minutes really closely, don't you? Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Gary is the second. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. We don't need a third one, right? Otherwise, we'll be here all night, right?
I don't think so.
All right.
We have to get past the 30-minute limitation for students to get their credit.
I know. All right.
I guess not to drag on that topic, but
Yes.
for my clarification, did we like language for what was the trigger? Either a change in tenant or a change in use, or do you want to see both?
Both.
I would,
Both.
I would agree both.
Okay,
Yes.
would you like any other additional information, like who does what? Would that be helpful? So like, I know how Lapeer does it, I know how Emily City does it, we can check some other jurisdictions to say they either do the change in use or change in tenant, would that be helpful, or?
Why don't you
think so.
craft that stuff, then we can take a look at it and
Okay.
decide, yes, we do, or no, we don't.
Okay.
Would that be helpful?
Yep.
Okay.
Could
great.
could you also include maybe a reasoning why they might do it that way?
Yep,
Two.
I can.
That would be perfect. Then we could discuss it and decide what we want to do and have good reasons why we want to do it.
Okay,
Okay?
right.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Anything else on that topic? Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Who
Second.
seconded?
Support.
Robert? Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. We're done.